This is a very bloody, gruesome scene.
It's all very suspicious.
As a forensic pathologist, my greatest fear is to miss a homicide.
I don't believe there was one spot on her face or her head that wasn't black and blue.
It became clear that Pastor Shermer was not who he presented himself to be.
I even commented to the officers in the department that maybe this wasn't an accident.
We owe it to the dead to bring forth the truth. How often do you have two wives with similar head injuries? And the obvious answer to that is never.
A shocking murder becomes a dark mystery. The victim's body holds the key to convicting the killer. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound is a piece of the puzzle. In these cases, it's up to the medical examiner to find the crucial evidence and catch the murderer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
We have quite a few churches in the county, some mountains, a lot of farmland. I'd call it a rural community.
Life here is laid back, a slower pace. A lot of the neighbors know each other, and it's just easy come.
The serenity of the small town is shattered in the early morning hours when investigators are called to Reader's Methodist Church.
There was a door that leads to the office that had a window smashed out. When the investigators arrive, they find Joseph Masante's body. He was slumped behind the desk. Mr. Masante was a parishioner at the church. There's a handgun laying at his feet. It is a very bloody, gruesome scene. Until we prove otherwise, we're investigating it as a homicide. In these types of investigations, it's very important to work with a medical examiner to help us understand and get us the medical evidence that we need to prosecute, to help us establish a cause and a manner of death.
Medical examiner's job is always to look for the truth.
For Dr. Ross, the key is understanding everything he can about the crime.
We owe it to the dead to bring forth the truth. The three rules of our office are, number one, rule out homicide. Number two, rule out homicide. And number three, rule out homicide. The crime scene is critical. The investigator's job is to look at the surrounding scene. But it's not like we live in two rigid compartmental worlds. We want to know how the body looks. Has the body been moved? Is the scene staged? Or is it a natural crime scene?
Someone had broke into this church. There was a window smashed out. There's a bullet lodged in the wall. No signs of a struggle. Bloodstain patterns were not out of place.
The evidence on Joe Masante showed he died of a gunshot wound to the head. What appeared to be a self-inflicted suicide.
The things that make a forensic pathologist cautious in classifying a death-suicide would be the scene not being secure, that other people have access to this individual.
The scene of Joe Masante found there was evidence of glass underneath his boots that may have indicated that he broke the window, but the glass could have been broken beforehand. Let's think about this a moment. What if he comes upon someone who's broken into the parishioner's area, and the glass is already broken, and he happens to stumble in there?
Investigators need to unlock what brought Joe into the church in the first place.
It is quite suspicious If you're going to kill yourself, why on earth would you ever break into the pastor's office? It doesn't make any sense. Unless there's some underlying connection that we are unaware of. So it's up to the investigator to explore what isn't making sense.
The first step for Detective Wagner is digging into the life of the victim.
Joe was a carpenter. He did some work around the community and also the church. He made the desk for the Reverend, the very desk that he sat behind. His wife, Cindy Masante, was actually the secretary to the Reverend Arthur Burton Shermer.
I met A.B. Shermer as a teenager. I lived several blocks from A.B. Shermer's home. Growing up, everybody looked up to a pastor as far as I was concerned. You know, we all respected Pastor Shermer. We respected his family and his daughters very much.
Investigators receive a tip suggesting there may have been more going on between the pastor and Joe Masante.
Joe's sister was suspicious about her brother's death. She contacted our office and had some concerns about the character of the Reverend. My job is to be suspicious, and I'm suspicious of everyone. We found out that the Reverend is involved in an affair with Joe's wife, Cindy Masante. During my investigation, I learned that not only is the Reverend having an affair, but he lost a wife 3 months prior to a fatal car crash. I thought that it was very suspicious. That made it very convenient for them to be together.
It's the first in a series of red flags.
He very quickly seemed to move on with the wife of Mr. Masante. It caught people's attention, and it really made people take a closer look at this alleged car crash and accident that his wife died in.
3 months earlier, Pastor Shermer's wife was killed in a single vehicle crash on a deserted stretch of road.
What stood out to me to be suspicious was Betty was not the first wife that he had lost. His first wife, Jewel, died in 1999 from a fall down a flight of stairs. And I even commented to the officers in the department that maybe this wasn't an accident. That case was left open. Her death was left undetermined. And I needed to investigate that as well.
Without exception, the spouse is always going to be considered the #1 suspect. Love, passion, betrayal, deceit, all of those things are intertwined and result in so many crimes.
Reverend Shermer is now linked to 3 mysterious deaths: Joe Masante and the pastor's 2 previous wives, Betty and Jewel Shermer.
There were a lot of questions about the Reverend's character and his shady past that were starting to develop.
Investigators decide to re-examine all of the cases, starting with Shermer's first wife, Jewel.
My sister was an easygoing person. She loved children. She had many responsibilities in the church. Choir director, in charge of the kids' Sunday school classes and youth choir.
Jewel Shermer was a great mom. She was a loving, doting pastor's wife. She did everything for her family, for her husband, and was considered quite a wonderful person in the community.
At first, her tragic death appears to be an accident.
A.B. Shermer told police when he came home, he found his wife at the bottom of the stairs.
He stated to the police and the EMS that he had gone out running for about 45 minutes.
There was a vacuum cleaner. She had the cord wrapped around her legs, and he believed she had fallen down the stairs and hit her head.
Jewel Shermer was rushed to the hospital. She had various radiology tests, including a CAT scan of her head. She was found to have a traumatic brain injury. She had surgery done. During the course of treatment, she had some elevated cardiac enzymes, what we refer to as troponins. So that raised the issue whether or not she may have had a cardiac-related event.
With Jewel on life support, her family gathers at the hospital.
When you looked at my sister laying in that hospital bed, I don't believe there was one spot on her face or her head that wasn't black and blue. My first words to my father were, something's not right here, because there was just too much trauma to the head and the face from falling down 6 steps.
At the hospital, they determined she had a heart attack, and that caused her to fall down the stairs and get a brain injury.
But that quick conclusion doesn't seem to match all of the evidence.
In people who have a heart attack and then fall down the stairs, the internal injuries would not show very severe hemorrhage, because if they're having a heart attack, their heart's not pumping effectively. And if their heart's not pumping effectively, then the head injury is not going to get very much blood, because there's no good blood pressure there.
As a forensic pathologist, my greatest fear is to miss a homicide.
The medical examiner isn't the only one who is growing suspicious.
Shermer's demeanor at the hospital was like he was at a Sunday school picnic. He was sitting with his daughters and some other people from the church, and they were laughing and joking and carrying on, to the point that my father leaned over to me and said, you know, for a guy that has his wife laying in there dying, he doesn't seem too overly concerned or distraught.
After a period of time, her husband decided to take her off life support.
The doctor left it up to the husband, Shermer, if he wanted an autopsy performed or not, which he declined. I was definitely immediately suspicious.
Without an autopsy, Jewel's death could be ruled accidental, preventing any further inquiry.
While Jewel's body was at the funeral home, Jewel's brother had called law enforcement, and as a result, she was taken for an autopsy.
But the body arrives with a new mystery.
Well, it was quite surprising to have Jewel Shermer's body without a heart. She was a donor, which means she had given her heart and organs prior to the autopsy. It does seem suspicious that a woman who died of a heart attack would be an organ donor. I mean, how odd is that? I kept on hounding everyone, saying, I want to know where the heart is, what's going on with the heart, was it transplanted into another person? I was able to get some medical slides. Her heart was healthy. When I examined it under a microscope, it showed no evidence of a heart attack, which is pretty obvious to a forensic pathologist. You would see dead heart tissue. I clearly determined that Jewel Shermer did not have a heart attack. It was clear as day. So if it's not a heart attack, then what is she doing at the bottom of a flight of stairs?
Crime is devastating anywhere and in any community. But in a small town, it's exceptionally devastating and rips a community apart.
There's not a lot of murder going on in any of these counties. I see approximately 10 to 15 homicides a year, maybe less than that.
In this close-knit community, the thought that Reverend A.B. Shermer, a man of God, might be involved in a murder is unbelievable.
The majority of our residents attend church, and a pastor or a preacher is a very well-respected member of our community. A.B. Shermer presented himself as that type of a person, a God-fearing person, somebody who could be trusted.
There were officers in our department who were parishioners of the church. He was a well-liked member of the community.
If there's a death and a pastor's involved, it can be considered insensitive or maybe a little bit too forthright to go and question that pastor.
We started to look into the real background of Pastor Shermer. It became clear that he was not who he presented himself to be.
Being a high-profile case, there's this increased level of pressure that an investigator does feel. And yet they have to insulate themselves from that because every murder is equally important. You have to go with where the evidence is taking you. And the stakes are even that much more higher. You got to make sure that you got it right. And don't rush.
Dr. Ross has proved that Reverend Shermer's first wife, Jewel, did not die from a heart attack, but her exact manner of death remains a mystery. Investigators turn to the passing of his second wife to examine that evidence for additional clues.
It was about 2 a.m. in the morning. The Reverend is rushing his wife to the hospital for what's known as TMJ, jaw pain, and a deer jumps out in the road. He violently swerves out of control and strikes a guardrail head on. First responders rush in. Betty sustains severe head trauma during the crash. She's not wearing her seatbelt. At the time of the accident, there was no suspicion whatsoever of foul play. They're both taken to the hospital. Betty is life-flighted about an hour away. Betty is on life support. Ultimately, the Reverend decides to take her off life support.
A decision eerily similar to the Reverend's first wife's accident.
The coroner's office in Lehigh County was told it was a traffic accident. And because the body was transported out of one county, she was never autopsied. Her husband had her cremated quite quickly after she had expired. So even if we wanted to do an autopsy, that was out of the question.
With no body to examine, investigators are forced to comb through evidence for other leads.
During an accident investigation with serious injury, it's procedure to take photographs, and fortunately, in this case, the patrol officers took some fantastic photos of the scene.
The images are a goldmine, allowing Dr. Ross and Detective Wagner to completely reconstruct and analyze the crash.
Mr. Shermer told the responding officers and the investigating patrolman that night that he was traveling about 50 to 55 miles an hour when he swerved to avoid this deer. There is no evidence of skid marks, yaw marks, which are from vehicles turning quickly, no evasive efforts whatsoever in the roadway. I examined the photographs and I instantly noticed that this is a low-speed collision with a guardrail, and there's minimal damage to the car. In fact, the car was actually drivable.
The photos showed me an accident that not only looked survivable, it looked like it was a minor fender bender. You can walk away from that accident.
The injuries I would expect to see in a passenger would have to have some correlation with the damage to the vehicle. So if there's minor damage to the car and yet severe injuries to the individual, that's a red flag.
Another indicator in speed or violent collisions is the deployment of airbags. And that did not happen in this case.
With questions mounting about the severity of the accident, investigators study the blood patterns inside the vehicle for more clues.
I'm always cued into the presence and absence of blood. The driver's side is what we refer to as a void pattern. There's no blood.
The photos also revealed a broken windshield near the mirror, which was not consistent with a head strike. What stood out to me was the amount of blood that was all over the passenger compartment of this car. Passive blood drops and bleeding in the door jamb. The passive blood drops absorbed in the seat underneath her body. That doesn't make sense.
If an unrestrained passenger moves forward in a typical frontal collision such as this, you'll find some blood on the dash, perhaps on the windshield. They ultimately will rebound in the seat, but you really shouldn't see a lot of blood in the seat back or behind the seat.
The blood would be on her body. Blood would be in areas around her body, but not under her body. In this case, the extrication process was taking Betty out through the passenger side door. There was a contact stain on the headrest that actually had a pattern of movement from the right to the left. That told me that something heavily saturated in blood had swiped across that seat in the direction that would be more consistent with her getting in the car, already bleeding heavily.
The presence of that blood and where it was in the car told me that bloodshed had occurred before she got into the car.
It's a shocking revelation, one that proves Reverend Shermer is lying about what transpired the night of the accident.
Betty Shermer was injured somewhere else and moved into that car.
After determining these factors, it becomes a homicide investigation.
The investigation into Reverend Shermer has revealed the car crash he claimed killed his second wife, Betty, was no accident.
There is serious suspicion that this is staged.
There's a saying in the gambling world, and that's the house always wins, and I think that criminals who are staging scenes are only buying time.
Betty was a wonderful woman. She was well loved and liked by everyone. I haven't heard a bad thing about Betty at all. The next step in the investigation is to go and search where she was prior to that crash, which was the parsonage where they live at the Reader's Methodist Church. Mr. Shermer had no idea that we reopened the crash investigation. Surveillance was important in the investigation because we wanted the element of surprise. We did not want to tip the Reverend off so he could tamper with any evidence whatsoever. During my surveillance at the parsonage, I noticed that Mr. Shermer would always drive his PT Cruiser into the garage. And that was important because the passenger side was always on the right side of the garage. I thought it was very strange after his wife dies in this car crash that he has the car repaired and still uses it. We were able to secure search warrants for the parsonage. I actually was a part of the forensic team, and we were looking for any signs of assault. I walked into the back of the garage, and as soon as I entered, I observed bloodstains on the concrete floor. I was shocked. I could not believe I was seeing bloodstains on the floor. At that point, utilizing luminol, a chemical that will make the blood glow in the dark, we developed a mysterious amount of blood all on the concrete floor. The blood-leading event came from the back door into the side of the garage, leading right to the passenger side of the car. And all of it stopped right where the car would have been.
Forensic testing proves beyond any doubt that this is Betty Shermer's blood.
It's as if Betty was leading us right to the crime.
The police identification of blood at the house was proof positive that she was injured before she was in the car.
She was beaten prior to the crash and put in the car, and the crash was staged.
It's a huge break in the case, but in order to bring charges against this man of the cloth, investigators need much more.
We needed to find where she was assaulted, how the beating occurred. I contact the investigators who were with Mr. Shermer, and at that point, he had no idea that we were searching the parsonage. And they ask him about Betty bleeding in the garage, and he denies that she ever did. When they convince him that there is blood in the garage, he then comes up with a story that Betty and he were moving some wood that was in the garage that had fallen on them, and it cut Betty's arm open. All of us thought it was BS. It was a made-up story.
Having people lie or being deceptive is more powerful than actually a confession. Because with all the pieces that they are telling you, there are gaps, signs and triggers, body language, easily identify that that person is in fact lying. Those are nails within the coffin of that offender.
When we searched the wood for blood evidence, at the bottom of this wood pile was a local paper that was dated September 2008. And that was significant because Betty was deceased in July of 2008 and couldn't have moved this wood and put it on that paper. It's impossible. She was dead at that time.
As damning as the evidence is, many in the community refuse to believe that the beloved Pastor Shermer could ever hurt anyone.
A.B. Shermer is a very charming man, using the pulpit, using the gospel to get people to trust in him, to confide in him.
Everyone thinks that he's this perfect person.
He knew how to sweet talk his way out of anything, and many times as I was growing up, he'd back himself in a corner and somehow he'd just sweet talk his way out of it.
In a small town where everybody knows everybody else's business, a murder is not only front page news, it's talked about at the dinner table, it's talked about at the coffee shop, on the church steps. Investigators have to remain objective despite the buzz in the community or the gossip they're hearing.
Slowly, cracks begin to appear in the notion of this perfect man of God.
When the public started to hear rumors about the investigation, that's when people started to come forward.
A.B. Shermer was having multiple affairs on my sister over the years. If you could sit him down and make him tell the truth, he probably couldn't give you a number. There was that many.
It was very clear that that was a continuous pattern with him throughout the course of his career as a pastor. He manipulated women, he manipulated their spouses into believing that he was looking out for their best interest when in fact it was the opposite.
As adored as he is, it becomes clear this reverend is really a wolf in sheep's clothing, hunting the most vulnerable women in his flock. It isn't easy, but investigators are determined to bring him to justice.
We don't have a body. Betty was cremated, which destroys evidence. Betty sustained severe lacerations to the right side of her head, and we were fortunate that she had CAT scans done.
For the medical examiner, those images could hold the key to proving the murders.
When I threw up the CAT scan on Betty Shermer's head, I'm really not seeing much on the scalp. I'm seeing swelling in the scalp. And we know there's bleeding in the brain, but there's not any obvious lacerations just looking at the CAT scan. It's not a three-dimensional image. But we're like, well, how are we gonna do this? Wouldn't it be great to have a three-dimensional model of her head, just like an autopsy, just like in real life? You can study a 3D model with the same confidence that you can with the body. We found some smart computer people who were able to take that CAT scan and produce a three-dimensional model. And lo and behold, wow.
The 3D scans allow Dr. Ross to examine Betty's injuries in close-up detail, just like having her in the morgue.
What we're looking at here is 2 lacerations, and you can see the staples on top. Obviously, this was not caused by a car accident. That would give you injuries to the front of the head. This is along the right side of the head. I didn't see any windshield abrasions to the front. I didn't see anything to the frontal bones. The lacerations were to the right side of the head and were very distinct up to the top of the head. Betty's injuries were not consistent with a car crash hitting a windshield or the dash, but they were consistent with blunt force trauma due to an object. What we can say from the science is we're doing a long cylindrical object. What are the things that are available? Crowbars, pipes, things of that sort.
Even more surprising is that Betty's injuries seem very similar to the wounds suffered by the pastor's first wife, Jewel Shermer, in her accident on the stairs.
The three-dimensional image showing the laceration in her head was glaring us straight in the face, and it was so foreboding, so obvious. How often do you have 2 wives with similar head injuries such as this? And the obvious answer to that is never.
Reverend A.B. Shermer is now linked to 3 mysterious deaths. High-tech imaging has proven to Dr. Ross that Betty Shermer died from blunt force trauma and not a car accident. Now armed with the cause of death from that case, investigators return to his first wife, Jewel, in order to understand how she really died.
What happened at the scene with Jewel Shermer? Did she really fall down the steps? If we're going to try to figure out how Jewel Shermer fell down those steps, we have to go back and reconstruct what happened. We can't use real people. But we do have dummies out there. And we do what we call a dummy toss, push them down the same steps that Jewel Shermer went down, and see what injuries she would get. We had accelerometers in the heads of these dummies. That way we can pick up the forces when the dummy's head hits the steps. We chalk up the heads of the dummies. And after you push the dummy down and it scrapes something, it'll leave what we refer to as white patterns or swipe patterns, which means the chalk is removed from the area on the head due to scraping the surface of the step. So we look at those patterns and we reconstruct in our mind, if my head struck that step, I would get a brush burn abrasion, or I would get bruises or contusions. And we try to compare those to the injuries on Jewel Shermer that we have from photographs and from illustrations.
It's cutting-edge science, and for Dr. Ross, it may be the last shot at uncovering the truth.
In our particular case with Jewel Shermer, she's got lacerations, but no significant abrasions from like a fall or anything like that. We also noted that there were significant brain accelerations up around 200, 300, 400 G's of force, which is a lot of force. That'll cause brain injury. But the other thing that we noticed was that there should be a neck fracture, or should be rib injuries, rib fractures, or pelvic injuries. Because when these dummies went down there, they hit at pretty remarkable speeds that would cause injuries. Now, what was interesting about those tests is Jewel Shermer has no neck injury, has no rib injuries, has no pelvic injuries.
Jewel Shermer could not have obtained those head injuries from falling down the stairs the way Pastor Shermer told us it happened.
After we had done our scientific testing, it didn't add up, didn't make sense. And so we excluded a fall down the steps as a viable cause of her injuries. And since we already had the heart information, we knew she didn't have a heart attack. It was rather obvious. She had died of a traumatic brain injury. But most importantly, this was a homicide.
The 3D scan proves that Betty Shermer's head injuries were not sustained in a car accident. Jules' trauma to the head is also scientifically proven not to have occurred from a fall down the stairs.
Jules Shermer had a severe traumatic brain injury with 4 different fracture areas. I mean, how do you get that? In this case, she was hit repeatedly with a long cylindrical object.
I believe Mr. Shermer beat her and assaulted her and then staged the fall, set up the vacuum, wrapped the cord around her leg, and left her there to bleed. Doing this type of job is difficult. You see so much evil and deceit in people. It's hard to not think that everyone can be like that.
I changed the cause of death from an undetermined manner of death to a homicide, and we had reasonable scientific evidence to support that conclusion.
We now had evidence of 2 staged deaths.
The Reverend wanted authorities to believe that both of his wives died accidentally. But the evidence uncovered by Dr. Ross tells a different story.
Both of them were struck with object multiple times. It was done almost the exact same way, on 2 distinctly different people in 2 different locations, both with the same husband.
It was shocking to see the similarities in both women's deaths. It becomes clear and obvious that the Reverend is a murderer.
Investigators have scientifically proven that both Reverend Shermer's wives were murdered. With the evidence, they secure a warrant for his arrest, and Detective Wagner's team moves in.
We found Mr. Shermer living at Joseph Masante's wife's home. We arrested him there, and it was very satisfying to put him in cuffs. Joe's death made it very easy for the pastor and Joe's wife to take their affair to a relationship.
There are 2 separate cases. Monroe County conducted a trial for the death of Betty Shermer. In Lebanon County, we conducted a grand jury investigation for the death of Jules Shermer.
At his trial, A.B. Shermer takes the stand, but the jury sees right through the Reverend's charm. They find him guilty of Betty's murder. Soon after, Shermer pleads no contest to Jules' murder.
We got justice for the victims of A.B. Shermer. Doesn't bring Betty or Jewel back, but it does at least provide justice for their families, knowing that we fought for them.
In a small town such as the Poconos here, this was very shocking behavior for a Reverend. I think a lot of people were surprised. I would never expect this kind of deceit and almost predator-like obsession with women. I think he thought he would get away with it.
When you stand back and look at the whole picture now, I'm glad that I stepped up in '99 because the autopsy on my sister helped bury him for the murder of Betty Jean.
Science doesn't lie, but people do routinely lie for many different reasons.
But there is still one more mysterious death linked to A.B. Shermer, Joseph Masante, whose wife Cindy was having an affair with the Reverend.
Joe Masante had a history of depression as well as alcoholism. However, his depression seemed to be in good order, except for one thing. He found out that his wife was having an extramarital relationship with the pastor, with Mr. Shermer.
The Reverend and Cindy had solid alibis the night that Joe died. And Mr. Shermer was warned by Cindy that Joe had taken his gun out of the house and that he was upset and he may be after him. So the Reverend fled to a hotel out of town.
The detailed investigation proves that Joe was alone in the church when he fired the shot.
The evidence on Joe Musante showed gunshot powder residue on the hand and a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, which classified it as a suicide. Even though this case was ruled as a suicide, this pastor is directly and indirectly linked to the death of 3 people.
Mr. Shermer didn't pull the trigger, but he is responsible for Joe Musante's death. There are 3 deaths on his hands. I believe Joe was sending a message to us in law enforcement that there was something shady happening with his family.
While his death is a tragedy, the final act may have protected others from Reverend Shermer killing again.
Based upon his life and his history as we saw it unfold through all those years, I would not be surprised if he would have killed a 3rd time.
Joe Musante's wife, I believe she would have been the next victim.
Charles Baudelaire said, "The devil's finest trick is to persuade you that he does not exist." And I think that's relevant in the case with Pastor A.B. Shermer, who used his charm and magnetism to draw in a congregation. Joe Musante trusted him and had turned to the church during difficult times in his life, turned to the pastor for salvation, and instead he was betrayed in the most cruelest way.
A.B. Shermer was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in jail for murdering Joel Shermer. He will never set foot outside of prison.
It's satisfying to get to the truth and finding out the truth, but it doesn't help the victims. It doesn't bring them back.
I do what I do because I believe in social justice. I believe in truth. Truth is always on the body and in the body. You just have to find it.